on Lamed Beis 32b at the two dots, more than 3/4 of the way down. And so we're in the middle of discussing the different things that can be said in any language, or versus the things that have to be said specifically in Hebrew. So the second item on the list of things that can be said in any language is Kriya Shema. I'm sorry, it's the third item on the list, I believe. Minolan, how do you know that Kriya Shema can be said in any language? The pasuk says, Shema Yisrael. Hear the Jewish people. The Chol Loshen Shad Shema. You have to. It can be said in any language which you hear, which you understand. Tana Rabbanon, the rabbi we've learned, Kriya Shema Kichsava. Divrei Rebbe. Rebbe's opinion is Kriya Shema has to be written, has to be spoken the way it is written, only in Hebrew. The rabbis taught B'chol Loshen in any language. My time at the Rebbe. What's the reason of Rebbe? Amakra, the pasuk says V'hayu. So the third pasuk of Shema says V'hayu Hadvarim Eila. V'hayu Hadvarim means these words should be as they are written. V'havyasan Yehu. You. So as they're written, they should be spoken, and not you can't just you can't say it in any language. And the rabbis say Shema means in any language you understand. According to the rabbi's opinion, what do they do with the fact that the Torah does say V'hayu? In other words, and V'hayu implies that it should be read the way it is written. So the Gemara says, according to the rabbi's opinion, what it means that it has to be read as it is written. It means you have to read it forwards. Can't read Shema backwards. The Rebbe Shaloi Kollel Mafreya Minolon. How does Rebbe know that you can't read Shema backwards? Nafkalei midvorim hadvorim. In fact, the Torah says hadvorim instead of the word dvorim. It could have said v'hayu dvorim ha'ela. Hadvar means these things. That includes also that v'hayu means as it is written, not just that you have to say Shema in Lashon Kodesh in Hebrew, but also that you have to read it in the proper order. The rabbis are not convinced that the extra hey on the word dvarim is enough of a proof text to be able to support the notion that this reading Shema backwards is not permitted. Rebbe Nami Haksiv Shema. What does Rebbe do with the fact that the Torah does say Shema? Shema implies that any language that you understand. So the Gemara says, Rebbe requires when you say the words of Shema that you hear what you say. You say it quietly enough you can't hear yourself. You don't fulfill the obligation. And the rabbis hold that if you don't hear Shema, you do fulfill your obligation. There's no obligation to hear what you're saying. Okay, now. So let's review here. Rebbe basically says Shema has to be said in Hebrew because v'hayu, havyasin you. The Rabbanan say Shema can be said in any language because it says Shema in any language that you understand. Now here's the question. Let's say there was no pasuk. So it would seem that the default position of the rabbis is that Shema it should be said in Hebrew. The fact that they need to tell the pasuk needs to tell me Shema can be said in any language. But why? It must be that the rabbis in general hold that everything needs to be said in Hebrew. Shema is an exception because the Torah says Shema v'chol sha'ata shemea in any language which you understand. So it would seem that the rabbis say that the default position is that anything in the Torah should be said in Hebrew. And according to Rebbe, the opposite is true. According to Rebbe has to prove that Shema has to be said in Hebrew. Presumably that means he holds that elsewhere nothing has to be said in Hebrew. unless the Torah specifically tells you it has to be said in Hebrew. So that's the Gemara's question. Lema Kasava Rebbe, top of 33a. Presumably the opinion of Rebbe would be Kol HaTorah b'chol lashon emra. All of Torah can be spoken in any language. And that's why, specifically, why Shema needs to have a pasuk that tells me no, it has to be said specifically in Hebrew. If you tell me that the rest of the Torah, any other obligation in the Torah needs to be spoken out in Lashon Kodesh. So why does the Torah need to say V'hayu? In other words, if Rebbe holds the default position is everything is in Hebrew, so then what is it? Then I know the Torah could have not written anything by Shema, and I know that Shema would be in Hebrew because it's like everything else. Why does Shema need its own riboy, its own addition, its own proof text to support the claim that Shema has to be said in Hebrew? So the Gemara says it's true. Even according to Rebbe, it would still be necessary. Shema, it's because the Torah says Shema, and Shema implies say it in any language. So Rebbe says the Torah needs to tell me that no, don't make the mistake and say Shema means in any language. Torah v'hayu. V'hayu meaning it has to be specifically spoken in Hebrew. What about elsewhere in the Torah? I don't know. It could be either direction. But by Shema, there's room for confusion because the Torah writes Shema. The Gemara repeats the same exact Gemara on the other side. According to the rabbi's opinion, all of Torah has to be spoken specifically in Hebrew. Because if the rest of Torah could be spoken in any language, why does the Torah need to write Shema to include the words of Shema to be spoken in any language? If that's the default position, it must be the default position is that no, Torah needs to be spoken out in Hebrew. So the Gemara concludes, no. It was necessary to say Shema, to write the word Shema, because it says V'hayu. V'hayu you might think means it has to be said spoken specifically in Hebrew. So that's why the Torah needed to write the words Shema. Okay, tefillah, prayer could be spoken in any language. The Gemara explains derachmihi, it's asking for God for compassion. Kol echad matzli, in any way that he wants to ask God for compassion, he can do that. So ask the Gemara, tefillah b'chol lashon, is it the case that tefillah could be spoken in any language? V'ha'amar Rabbi Yehudah said, La'olam al yish'al adam tzrochav b'lashon aramis. Person should not pray in Aramaic, the same language that the Talmud is written in. Although obviously the Eastern dialect, which is Talmud Bavli, is more Hebraic than the Talmud Yerushalmi and the Zohar. So there's less Aramaic in the Bavli than in the other Talmud or Zohar. Amar Rav Yechanan. 1 second.
We're saying that there's more of a mixture of Hebrew and Aramaic.
There's more Hebrew in Bavli, in Talmud Bavli, the Talmud that we're learning right now, than in the other Talmud. In Talmud, so not in the Mishnah. Not in the Mishnah. The Mishnah is much more of the Mishnah is basically Hebrew. It's Mishnaic Hebrew. But the Talmud is written in Aramaic, but again, this is more of a Hebraic Aramaic than the other Talmuds.
Okay.
So okay. So Amar Yechanan Amar Yechanan Kol Shah Tzorach B'Lashon Arami Ein Malachi Hasharas Niskaken Lei V'She'ein Malachi Hasharas Makirin B'Lashon Arami. So Rav Yechanan explains, anyone who davens in Hebrew in Aramaic, he's not listened to. Why? Because the angels that carry the prayers, they don't know what he's talking about, because the angels don't understand Aramaic. This is not a joke. This is a very deep Kabbalistic idea here. All our davening is in Hebrew except for
Kaddish?
Yeah, absolutely. Kaddish is
Well,
not said in Hebrew.
why?
What?
Why is the only thing not in Hebrew in morning davening the Kaddish?
Yeah, there's a few. There are a few other things, like on the Seder night. There's only one part that's Aramaic,
Well,
right?
I mean, daily speaking,
Halach Ma'anya is Aramaic. The idea here is sometimes you don't want the angels. You just want to go straight. When you want to proclaim God's glory, you just want to go straight.
You don't want the.
But we'll learn in a moment as well. Yeah. So the Gemara says, "Lo kasha habi yachid habi tzibur." If you pray as an individual, so then you have to pray in a language that the angels can understand, that they can bring your prayer. But habi tzibur, if you pray in a congregation, so then the pasuk says, "Hein kel kaver la yimas." God will never remove himself from the prayer of a congregation, which is one of the reasons that the simple understanding is that praying with a tzibur, with a community in a minyan, it's an obligation in the sense that if it's available, you should do it. So in other words, if one has an opportunity to pray with a minyan, he's obligated to pray with a minyan, but he's not obligated to go put himself in a position where he would be obligated to go to a minyan. Right? So if you're on a trip and you're far away from anybody, you're exempt from minyan. You're not obligated to go to a minyan. You're not obligated not to take the trip either. There's no obligation for that. You can go far away and you won't be obligated with a minyan. However, there is opinion, it's Moshe Feinstein's opinion, where he points out that when you pray with the community, God is much more attentive to your prayers. So Moshe holds that it's actually a chiyuv. That means it would be you have to have a reason not to be in a minyan. It's not clear that the halacha follows his opinion, but regardless, the idea here is you see very clearly that even if a person's prayer is subpar, right? But if he davens in the congregation, he prays as part of a minyan, God listens to his prayers anyway. Okay. Now, this is just one problem here. Is it the case that the angels do not understand Aramaic? Vatanya, we learned Yochanan Kohen Gadol Shama Baskel. So Yochanan Kohen Gadol was the Kohen Gadol at the time of the Hanukkah miracle, I believe. Yeah. Yochanan Kohen Gadol was one of the Maccabees. So it was Yom Kippur, and he was bringing the Torah, the incense, in the Kodesh Kodashim, the holies of holies, and he hears a heavenly voice ring out. The victorious were the sheep meaning the young Kohanim of Chashmonaim, the Ozlu la'agacha krova la'Antochia, that went out to battle in the town of Antochia. B'shuv Mais, there's another story. Shimon HaTzadik was the son of Yechanan post Hanukkah miracle. Shishama Baskal, he heard a heavenly voice. He based Kodesh Kodashim on Yom Kippur when he was in the Kodesh Kodashim, the holies of holies. Shu Omer, that the voice said, "Betelas avidta," the military battalion. It has been nullified. To Amar Sana, that the enemy said, "I saw al Hechola," that the enemy had intended to bring this battalion to destroy the Hechol, the temple. V'nerag Gaskalgas ubotlug zeroisav, and the king with these evil machinations, he was killed, and his plans have been nullified. Because they wrote down that time, meaning it doesn't mean they wrote down that time. They obviously weren't writing in Kippur. It means they remember that time. They wrote it down after Yom Kippur, and then eventually, some days or weeks later, the message came v'kivnu, and it actually happened on that day. It's exactly when he heard the heavenly voice. That's exactly when the Gaskalgas was killed, and the battalion that was sent to destroy the temple was nullified. It was brought back. Okay, the problem is both of these heavenly voices spoke out in Aramaic. These were Aramaic. One possibility is Baskel Shiny. A Baskel, a heavenly voice, is different, even though presumably it's carried by an angel, But the purpose of it is to tell people, to inform them what's going on. And if the language they understand is Aramaic, it's going to speak to them in the language they understand. The Bayesema, another possibility is the one who spoke out this heavenly voice was Gavriel, right? Gavriel is the protector of the Jewish people, an angel that protects the Jewish people. The Amar Mar, because we've learned, so when Yosef was in the pit, right? So they brought him to Egypt. He was in prison for purportedly trying to seduce the wife of Potiphar, right? Eventually, he was in prison for an additional 2 years, and then he had the story. He had the Paro has these dreams, nobody can understand them, and finally the Saramashkin, the one who the fellow who poured the king's wine, suggests he summon Yosef. Now, one of the conditions to appear in front of the ruler as sort of an expert, you had to have known 70 languages. And Yosef did not know 70 languages. So Gavriel came and taught him 70 languages. Now, if he taught him 70 languages, obviously one of the languages was Aramaic. And evidently, Gavriel, the protector of the Jewish people, knows Aramaic as well. Okay. Birchas Hamazon, grace after meals, what we call benching. It's a Yiddish word, benching. Anyway, thanking God for the food that he gave us. Because the verse states, "V'achalta you shall eat, v'savata you'll be full, uverachta es Hashem alekecha, and you'll bless Hashem your God, v'chol lashon she'atem mevarach, in any language that you can bless him." Okay, shvuas edus. Shvuas edus is a shvua, an oath that is either on behalf of a single witness. So two witnesses, you need two witnesses to affect any monetary change, but a single witness could require a shvua. Or alternatively, if you suspect that somebody knows, this is what goes on in Congress all the time, right? When they summon people for testimony and they make them speak under oath that they don't know anything, basically, which is basically all the testimony these days anyway, right? Everyone testifies under oath that they don't know anything. Nobody knows anything about anything. Yeah. Same people that knew 5 years ago, all of a sudden they all forget. They come in front of Congress. Yeah, it's not good for your health, especially in old age. So it brings clearly signs of dementia for people that appear in front of Congress. They cannot remember what happened yesterday. Anyway, so that's an example of Shvuas Eidos. They're being called to testify, and they're swearing under oath, they're affirming under oath that they don't know anything. They don't remember what happened yesterday. Because the pasuk says, "V'nefesh kisechta b'shama kol Allah." Okay. Yeah, this is basically a reference to a person who's witnessed something occur, but he denies it. V'shama kol Allah, and he hears the sound of a curse. In other words, he affirms that he doesn't know anything.
Rabbi, but you should restate the page.
We're on one line above the wide lines on 33a. So koil ola means the sound. Koil means the noise of ola of a curse, meaning the sound of an affirming, an oath. I.e., the fellow is sinning by affirming to the fact that he knows nothing. But koil ola means that he heard the sound of the affirmation of the oath in any language which he understands. Shvuas HaPekadon. Shvuas HaPekadon is another type of oath. This is the common type of oath. The Shvuas HaPekadon is you were asked to watch an item. Typically, that's how it works. And either you were paid or you weren't paid, and then the item disappeared. Either, because of an event that was impossible to sort of predict, and or because there was some sort of negligence, or depending on how much negligence there were, maybe you have to pay, maybe you don't have to pay. If you don't have to pay, then you're called if you don't have to pay, you are called, you have to make a shvuah. By the way, this is just an important side note. This is true today as well. So when a person is asked to do a favor for somebody else, effectively he's what's called a shomer chinam. He's a watchman that does not charge. So if somebody asks you to drive their car to the mechanic, you're a watchman on the car now. And if you get into an accident, then the individual who loaned the car is entitled to require you to make a shvuah. that you were not negligent in participating in the car crash. And because today we don't, this is a type of shvur d'oraisa, we do not make a shvur d'oraisa, so we don't make a biblical shvur anymore. Effectively, what happens is you have to pay for the car, which is why that I once had somebody ask me to carry something for him from one place to another. So I told him, okay, I'll carry it for you, but that there's no shvur. If it breaks or gets damaged, there's no shvur. And he was a smart man. He knew Chesed Mishpat, and he said, no. He said, don't carry it for me. So I said, okay, I'm glad I made the condition, because otherwise I was carrying an airplane where it could have easily broken and it wouldn't have been my fault.
Yeah.
I said, for that, I'm not carrying it for you. Why would I expose myself that way? Anyway.
It's a heavy burden to carry.
It was also very heavy. That's a side point. Anyway, so it's an important thing to note. If you're doing a favor for someone and you're watching something that might have significant value, you might want to specify that you do not want to make a shvuah. You have to be believed without a shvuah. So in other words, you'll accept the same responsibility, but there's no shvuah in case you messed up. This type of shvuah is called shvuah sapikoden. Asya techta mishvuas ha'edos. The source of this is the fact that when the verse speaks of someone who watches somebody else's object, so it says so he denies. In this case, we're talking about a scenario where he's actually guilty. So he was a watchman. He was supposed to watch his friend's lawnmower, and he left it outside, and it was stolen.
This is not a paid thing, though. He didn't get paid.
He wasn't paid. But this. Let's presume here at least that.
I understand the distinction.
Yeah. Well, let's presume that leaving a lawnmower on your front lawn is pretty negligent. I'm not saying it is. I don't know. My neighbor leaves a lawnmower on the front lawn and it's never stolen. So let's presume, or instead of a lawnmower or something of real value, maybe a useful bike, a bicycle, and somebody just made off with it. So in that case, the guy's guilty. He's been negligent in watching the other guys. But he denies it. He says that the bike was in the garage, it was locked, and somebody broke into the garage and took it. So he sins by lying under oath. The word here is sechta, and sechta is also the word used for someone who denies that he knows testimony to someone else. Right? The same word is used in both places, just like we know that by shvuas ha'edus, where somebody knows testimony and swears to the effect that he does not know it. The word uses techta, and the word by shvuas ha'pekad is also techta. So you learn one from another, and therefore, it can be in any language. These things can be spoken have to be spoken specifically in Hebrew. Mikra bikurim v'chalitza, and the Gemara goes through mikra bikurim case that how exactly is bikurim. What exact? How do we know that bikurim has to be spoken out in Hebrew? V'anisa v'amarta l'fnei Hashem lekecha. It says v'anisa v'amarta. You will answer and you will speak. That the Levium spoke out the blessings and the curses when the Jewish people received the blessing and the curses on Har Gerizim and Har Eivel. They spoke it out in. It also says v'anu v'amru. They answered and they spoke. Just like there it was in Hebrew, so to bikurim is in Hebrew as well. Ma'aniya hamura lahalan b'lashon kodesh afkan b'lashon kodesh ulevim gufayim minalei. And how do we know that when they received the blessings and the curses, it was in Hebrew? Asya kol mimosha. It says Levim spoke out kol with a voice, a sound, literally a sound. And the other time it says kol is by Moshe Rabbeinu. When Moshe received the 10 Commandments, it says God answered him in a sound, in a voice. Malahalan b'lashon hakodesh. Just like the 10 Commandments were received in Hebrew, Afkan b'lashon hakodesh, the blessings and the curses were given in Hebrew as well, and therefore, just like the blessings and the curses were given in Hebrew, so to bikurim also must be spoken in Hebrew. Next one, chalitza. Chalitza is all familiar with chalitzas? Okay. Chalitza keitzad. Okay, so 1 second. The Gemara brought two sources. One is the fact that it says va'ansa va'amra, the woman will answer and speak. And again, ansa va'amra is learned from the Levium giving the blessings and the curses. And Rabbi Yehudah said, it says kacha yayasa leish. Now, the right way to read the pasuk is Va'ansa va'amra, she answers and she speaks, and these are the words that she says. This shall happen to a person that refuses to build his brother's house. But it could also be read as follows. Va'ansa va'amra kacha. She will answer and speak as follows. And kacha means as follows, meaning literally these words. What do they do with the words of kacha, which implies it has to be specifically as the words are written in Hebrew? In other words, kacha tells me that any part that the Torah speaks that she has to spit, she has to remove the shoe, all the actions, all the activities are required. Kacha means exactly as it's written, that's how it has to be performed. Rabbi Yehudah, mikah kacha. Rabbi Yehudah says the fact that it could have said ka, and instead it says the word kacha, it implies both. It implies it has to be in Hebrew, and exactly as it is written, it has to be performed with all the same actions. Rabbanon ka kacha loy mashma. Rabbanon do not think that is an additional proof text for which to cite the requirement to speak in Hebrew. Rabbi Yehudah, according to Rabbi Yehudah, va'ansa va'amr ma'avdilei. What does Rabbi Yehudah do with the fact that the verse states va'ansa va'amr shall answer and shall speak? So the Gemara says, like mur le'leviim de b'lashon hakodesh. Actually, according to Rabbi Yehudah, how does Rabbi Yehudah know that the Levium? So just now we explained the source. How do we know the Levium spoke out in Hebrew? Because it's learned from Moshe Rabbeinu. Just like Moshe received the 10 Commandments in Hebrew, the Levium also spoke in Hebrew. Rabbi Yehudah says no, it's actually coming straight from Chalitza. Chalitza we know is in Hebrew because it says kacha, and it also says va'ansa va'amra. I'll answer and speak. She will answer and speak. Just like by the Levium it says va'anu va'amru, and by the woman of Chalitza it says va'ansa va'amra. Therefore, I know the Levium and Hagrizim and Areval spoke when they received the blessings and the curses. They spoke in Hebrew. The Leilef call me Moshe. Why doesn't he learn from Moshe Rabbeinu, from the 10 Commandments, like the rabbis, like I explained to you 3 minutes ago? So Gemara says, Ani a gomer, kol loy gomer. He did not have a tradition that there was such a comparison between the 10 Commandments and the receiving of the blessings and the curses. This is what's called Gzera Shava. One receives Gzera Shava as a tradition, and he did not have that tradition. He had the tradition that it was learned from Chalitza. Tanyanami Hachi, Rabbi Yehudah Aimer, Kol Makom Shenemar Ka Kacha, Aniya V'Amira, Eini Al Lashon HaKodesh. Whenever it says the words Kacha, or it says Aniya and Amira, it means Lashon Kodesh. Kai, it would be Kai Sevarchu, or Kacha de Chalitza. So Kai means as is. So Hashem tells Moshe to tell Aaron. Tells Aaron directly, I believe. It tells Aaron directly that this is how you bless the Jewish people. So the Kohanim are told exactly how to do it. Kai Sevarchu, exactly as follows. So Kai is another code word. It's got to be exactly as it is written in place. That would be Berachas Kohanim, the way the Kohanim bless the congregation. Kacha de Chalitza. She speaks as follows, also exactly how the Torah wrote. And Aniya v'Amira de Levium, Ba'anav Amru Levium is also learned from Chalitza. And he does not point to the fact that by Levium it says Kollel. Because according to the rabbis, it's the Levium actually, the way we know that the Levium spoke in Hebrew is the fact that the Torah uses the word Kollel, and not from the fact that the Torah uses the word Aniya and Amira. Okay, we'll begin the next Gemara. I'll probably have to stop in middle. Well, let's just give a little bit of a background. In in Parshas Kisavai, the Jewish people learn exactly how the process of Hagrizim and Haravel are going to take place, but it happens later on. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu teaches them how God will inform them of the blessings and the curses, and where they will be and how they will stand. But it actually happens after they cross over the Jordan River. They're in what we, sort of the part of Israel that's between the Jordan and the Mediterranean, and they're on a mountaintop. We'll soon see where it is, and that's where they get up on the mountain and they pronounce the blessings and the curses. They formally accept these blessings and curses. So obviously this happens after they come into Israel. Yeshua at that point is the leader. and Yeshua crosses them over the Jordan River. We'll soon see the Jordan River dried up. Back to that in a moment. Okay. So Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. There's two opinions here. We'll start with the first opinion, which is exactly in line with what we learned in the Mishnah. Halayhema be'ever hayardin. The location of Hagrizim and Haravel is be'ever hayardin, on the other side of the Jordan River. Me'ever layardin ve'elach, the other side of the river and further. Divrei Rabbi Yehudah. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah. Achrei derech mevoy hashemesh. Following the pathway of the sun. What does that mean? Makom shechama zerachas, meaning the sun would rise over the Jordan. 1 second. Okay. In other words, they were on a mountaintop overlooking the Jordan River, and quite a distance from the Jordan itself. This opinion, we'll see in a moment. This opinion okay, let's continue. Be'eretz Canaan, in the land of Canaan, Hayoshev ba'arava. They were in the area of the Arava. Arava is the valley. Elu hagrizim v'haravel. Sheyoshem behem kusiyim. So he understands Arava, the valley, to actually be a reference to the Kusiyim, where the Kusiyim live. 1 second. Okay, now it's important to note that this is a Talmudical location marker, because the Kusiyim did not live in Israel at that time. They were brought there hundreds of years later by Sennacherib, general. So this is taking place in the Arava, in the Arava is 1 second. How do they translate the word Arava? Okay, we'll see. He does, according to this opinion, the word Arava is not, it's not an important location marker. Arava is sort of a reference to Eretz Yisrael as well. 1 second. Elu hagrizim haravel, sheyoshem b'kusim, mul ha'gilgal, opposite of Gilgal, samech leGilgal, close to the area of Gilgal. Eitz le'Eloni Meira, near the area of Eloni Meira, that's Shechem. Until the area of Elon Meira, which is Shechem. Ma Elon Meira ha'amar l'halon Shechem, afkan Shechem. Shechem is the area of Elon Meira. If you look at the article, they have a nice map, which is quite helpful. Yeah.
I just want to point out it's also where the town of Itmar is located.
Okay. Yeah. So this is in the central Shomron area. The central Shomron area is what we'd be talking about. And okay, which is quite a distance from the Jordan River. However, Tanya, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Lazar, the son of Rabbi Yossi, disagreed, and he said, "B'davar zeh ziyafti sifrei kusiyim." Through this, I sort of proved that the books of the Kusiyim were forgeries. The Kusiyim did not accept the rabbinic tradition; they only accepted the biblical tradition, only the biblical texts. Amarti lahem ziyaftim terastam. You forged Torah, v'le'alisam b'yadchem klum, and you haven't been able to find anything useful in it. She'atem oimrim Elonei Meira Shechem. You argue that Elonei Meira is the area of Shechem. Afan omaydim she'Elonei Meira Shechem. I agree with you. Anu lamdanu b'gzera shava. We've learned this from Gzera Shava. Atem b'ma lamadtum. But how do you know this? In other words, the Kusiyim knew they lived on Hagrizim and Haravel. And they said, Hagrizim and Haravel, that's the area of Shechem. But he's saying to them, how do you know it's Shechem? The only way to know it's Shechem is that possibly a different Elonei Meira is called Shechem. So you have to compare the two portions of the Torah to equate one category to the other. Just like Elon Meira of Avram Avinu was Shechem, so to the Elon Meira where you live next to, which is Hagrizim and Haravel, is also Shechem. That obviously is a rabbinical concept. Okay. And with that, he proved that the rabbinical understanding of how to study Torah is required. Rabbi Lazar taught this is a different opinion. Rabbi Lazar disagrees with Rabbi Yehudah, and he teaches as follows: Halayhema be'ever yarden, they are across the Jordan. What does that mean? Samach yarden, they're close to the river. The ime ever yarden ve'elach halek siv haya ba'aver chemes yarden. it can't mean that they were a distance from the Jordan, because it says when you cross the river, that's when you'll do you'll accept the blessings and the curses, the brachas and the klolas. Achrei derech mevaya shemesh, after a period where the sun sets. What does that mean? Makom shachama shekas ba'eretz. Makom shachama shekas. 1 second. It's the place where the sun sets, meaning where the sun sets over the mountains. So in other words, they're at a distance from the mountains. They're in the Jordan Valley, Jordan River Valley, and they're at a distance from the mountains. But Eretz Knani, in the land of Canaan, the Gemara asks Eretz Chivi. It's really the land of the Chivi. 1 second.
Rabbi,
1 second. Yeah.
if they were allowed to convert, would that make them the Hades?
Hold on, 1 second. Okay. This is Rabbi Lozer at this point asking on Rabbi Yehudah. In other words, Rabbi Yehudah says that it was an Eretz Canaan. Actually, the land of Shechem was not Eretz Canaan, it was Eretz Chivi. Shechem was from the Chivim. Hayoshe ba'arova, that rests in the Arova, in the mountains. 1 second. I'm sorry. Arova, I think, is the plains, which makes more sense. Arova is the plains, right? It's a flat area.
Steeps or flat areas, yeah.
Yeah. So he's asking to him, Valoi ben Haram voice in Yeshim. Shechem and Elone Mora is in a hilly area, which is modern Samaria, and not in the flat area of the Jordan River plain. Mul HaGilgal, opposite Gilgal. Gilgal. It's impossible to see the area of Gilgal, which is next to the Jordan River, from the area of Shechem. So according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, I remember Legboa Kosov Elaharis Landerech B'Shniya K'derech Shahar Lahem Berishayna. So basically, until now, there was an amud onan. There was a pillar of a cloud that led them on the way. And over here, the Torah is saying that as soon as Moshe Rabbeinu dies, the pillar of cloud will be gone, and they'll have to. And here is the route. This is the route that they should take. Derech b'derech lechu v'loy b'sedes akram. Follow the roads. Don't go into fields. Hayoshev b'yishav lechu v'loy b'midbaris. Travel in the settled areas and not through the desert. Ba'arova in the flatter areas. Ba'arova lechu v'loy b'har mikvos. Don't traverse the mountains. Tana Rabbanon. Kate said over. He's Monday, right? Stop here. Stop here. Okay, have a great day. Step here.
Steeps.
Yeah.
Like that, it's steeps. Like
It's the flat. I think it's a flat.
the steeps in the mountains, right? The flat areas.
Yeah.
Read in this book to learn Hebrew called the Harklapot Shel Dodar